The Zenthara Collegiate Institute occupied 17 floating platforms in the upper atmosphere of Velion Prime, a planet so aggressively pleasant that its native species had evolved without developing a fight-or-flight response. Why would they? The most dangerous predator on Velion Prime was a herbivore that occasionally got startled and ran away from its own shadow. The weather was perpetually 72 degrees with a light breeze. The gravity sat at a comfortable 0.6 standard. Rain fell only during designated hours, and even then, it was warm and somehow didn't make anyone wet unless they wanted to be. In short, it was the kind of place where natural selection had taken a permanent vacation. This made it perfect for higher education, according to the Galactic Confederation's Department of Academic Excellence. 1,700 species sent their brightest minds here. Their offspring of politicians and business magnates, their future diplomats and scientists. The curriculum was rigorous. The facilities were state-of-the-art. The student body was utterly, comprehensively unprepared for anything that didn't come with a safety rating and an instruction manual. Enter humanity. The humans had been admitted to the Confederation only 40 standard cycles ago, which in galactic political terms was approximately 15 minutes. They'd passed the basic requirements. Faster-than-light travel, check. Unified planetary government, check, though the assessors had some serious questions about how that government actually functioned. No active genocide programs, check. Current ones, anyway. Cultural artifacts demonstrating artistic sophistication, check, though several council members had needed therapy after reviewing human horror entertainment. The evaluation committee had deemed them acceptable, if rustic. Charming, even, in their primitive enthusiasm. Their homeworld, Earth, had been classified as Category 4 on the Habitability Index. Not ideal, but manageable with proper infrastructure. Nobody had bothered to read the full planetary assessment report. If they had, they might have noticed that Earth's rating was dragged up to Category 4 exclusively by human testimonials, insisting it wasn't that bad and builds character. The actual data suggested something closer to Category 11, avoid at all costs. But bureaucracy being what it was, humans were now part of the galactic community. And that meant human students at institutions like Zenthara. Most species had responded to this development with the sort of polite indifference they might show to a new flavor of nutrient paste. Humans were there. They existed. How quaint. Tobias Chen had arrived at Zenthara 3 months ago. One of 8 humans in a student body of 43,000. He was studying xenobiology with a minor in comparative atmospheric sciences, maintained a respectable 3.7 grade average, and had committed the apparently cardinal sin of existing while being from Earth. The other, Yathan, students didn't know what to make of him. He was built wrong, for starters. Most species at Zenthara had evolved under gentle gravitational pulls on worlds where the greatest physical challenge was reaching a high shelf. They were tall, elegant, willowy. Their bones were hollow or cartilaginous. Their muscles were optimized for fine motor control, not load-bearing. Tobias, at 5'9" and 170 pounds, looked like a tank with legs. His bone density was alarming. His muscle-to-body fat ratio suggested someone who regularly escaped predators or maybe wrestled them for fun. The way he moved, with a casual awareness of his surroundings that never seemed to stop, made people nervous in ways they couldn't articulate. He was friendly enough, smiled a lot, laughed at jokes, participated in study groups. But there was something in his eyes. Something that suggested he was constantly calculating exits and threat vectors even while discussing molecular biology. The civilized species of the galaxy found it unsettling. 3 students in particular found it offensive. Krelvan was a Dorthelian, one of the so-called founder species, who'd established the Confederation 8,000 cycles ago. His people had evolved on a world where the air was so rich in oxygen that breathing required minimal effort, and the gravity was so light that they'd developed elegant, elongated frames that would shatter like glass under Earth-standard conditions. He stood 7 feet tall, weighed maybe 90 pounds, and had never experienced physical discomfort beyond a stubbed toe, which had required hospitalization. His companions were Jezrith, a Quellan whose crystalline exoskeleton had evolved in the warm, mineral-rich caves of her homeworld, and Morthan, an Avix whose species had achieved sentience in the carefully controlled environment of their planet's massive tree systems, where falling more than a few feet was literally impossible due to the dense vegetation. They were brilliant by their society's standards. They were elite. They were utterly convinced of their superiority. And they had decided that Tobias Chen needed to be taught his place. "It's not about cruelty," Krelvan explained to his companions as they made their way through Zenthara's crystalline corridors. "It's about education. The human clearly doesn't understand the social hierarchy. Someone needs to clarify things. His presence in advanced stellar chemistry is disruptive," Jezrith added, her voice chiming like wind through glass. "He asks questions that slow the lecture. He challenges theories that have been established for millennia." "He smiled at me last week," Morthan said, shuddering. "Showed his teeth. It was aggressive. None of them had bothered to learn that humans smiled to show friendliness, not dominance. Research was for lesser beings. Their plan was elegant in its simplicity. Zenthara had several restricted laboratory sections used for psychological research and neural mapping. These labs contained equipment designed to induce controlled emotional responses, fear primarily, calibrated for therapeutic applications. The idea was that exposure to simulated threats could help students overcome minor anxieties. For species from civilized worlds, minor anxieties meant things like public speaking or unexpected schedule changes. The equipment had never been tested on a human. They found Tobias in one of the lower platforms, in a common study area overlooking Velion Prime's pink-tinted clouds. He was alone, reviewing notes on his datapad, something that looked like coffee steaming in a cup beside him. The beverage was actually a chemical cocktail that would be mildly toxic to most species, but that humans found pretty good. "Tobias Chen," Krelvan announced, his voice carrying the particular tone of someone who'd never been told to shut up. "A moment of your time." Tobias looked up, and there it was. That split-second assessment, eyes flickering to each of them, to the exits, to potential weapons in the environment. It happened so fast that the 3 elite students didn't even notice. "Sure," Tobias said, offering that teeth-showing smile. "What's up?" Krelvan's translator implant momentarily glitched at the colloquialism. "We have been selected to conduct a research project in the Neural Dynamics Laboratory. We require a volunteer from a less represented species for diversity of data." This was, of course, a complete fabrication. But they'd forged the documentation. They had access codes. Everything appeared legitimate. Tobias hesitated. Not because he suspected anything. The concept of students casually committing elaborate crimes for social reasons was alien to him, but because he had an essay due. Then again, contributing to research looked good on academic records. "Yeah, okay," he said, gathering his things. "How long will this take?" 30 minutes at most," Jezrith chimed. It would take considerably longer than that. The Neural Dynamics Laboratory was located in Platform 7, accessible through a series of transit tubes that offered spectacular views of Velian Prime's endless pleasant weather. Tobias made small talk during the journey, asking about their studies, their homeworlds. The three elite students answered with barely concealed condescension, exchanging glances that said, "Can you believe this primitive is attempting conversation?" Tobias noticed but misinterpreted it as general social awkwardness. He was trying to fit in after all, trying to be less intense. His roommate, a Falarian named Quix, had gently suggested that maybe Tobias could try not looking like he was constantly prepared for an ambush during casual interactions. He was working on it. The lab was impressive. A large circular chamber with holographic displays, neural monitoring equipment, and what looked like a comfortable chair in the center, surrounded by scanning apparatus. Everything was white and chrome and absolutely pristine, civilized. "Please, sit." Krelvan gestured to the chair. "We'll attach some standard monitoring nodes. Completely harmless." Tobias sat. The chair was ridiculously comfortable, probably because it was designed for species with delicate skeletal structures. He waited patiently while Jezrith attached small adhesive sensors to his temples and wrists. "This will measure your neural responses to various stimuli," she explained. "Standard psychological baselines." What she didn't explain was that they were about to bombard his consciousness with fear-inducing scenarios calibrated to terrify the average Confederation citizen into seeking counseling. Morthen activated the equipment from a control panel, his manipulators dancing across holographic interfaces. Beginning sequence 1. Mild environmental stressors. The lights dimmed slightly. The temperature dropped by 5 degrees. A low humming sound began, calibrated to trigger anxiety in most species. Tobias blinked, glanced around. Is something supposed to be happening? The three students exchanged confused looks. The sensors showed elevated attention, but nothing resembling fear. "Perhaps the equipment requires calibration for human neurology," Krelvan said, though his tone suggested irritation rather than scientific curiosity. Increased to Sequence 4. Sequence 4 was typically reserved for advanced desensitization therapy. It created holographic projections of common predators from various worlds, all safely extinct or confined to nature preserves, of course. The images were accompanied by spatial audio and pheromone synthesis to create realistic threat scenarios. The lab filled with ghostly apparitions of creatures that looked vaguely dinosaur-adjacent, their holographic forms snarling and lunging. The audio system produced roars and shrieks. The pheromone synthesizers released chemical markers for danger. Tobias watched with interest. "Huh. Is that a Vexillian cave lion? We studied those in xenobiology. Went extinct about 600 cycles ago, right? Shame. Cool-looking animal." He was literally critiquing the educational accuracy of his own psychological torture. Jezrith's crystalline structure flickered with confusion. "You're not concerned. These are apex predators." "We're apex predators," Tobias corrected absently, studying a hologram. "And they're, what, 300 pounds? 400? 470, Morthen supplied. They were the most feared hunters on their continent." "Oh." Tobias nodded. "That's actually pretty light for a large predator. Earth has had, I guess, they're endangered now. Tigers that get up to 700 pounds. Polar bears that hit 1,500. And that's not even counting extinct stuff like the megafauna." He said this casually, the way someone might discuss weather patterns. The three elite students stared at him. Their translators had to be malfunctioning. 1,500 pounds of predator? That was nonsensical. That was biologically impossible. Nothing that large could hunt efficiently. "You're exaggerating." Krelvan said flatly. Your world couldn't sustain such creatures. I mean, it did for millions of years. Tobias shrugged. Still does, mostly. We have conservation programs. Conservation programs, Jezrith repeated slowly. For creatures that size, that hunt. Well, yeah, they're endangered. We kind of took over their territory. Tobias said it like this was obvious. Like protecting massive predators was just basic environmental policy. Krelvan's elongated fingers tightened on the control panel. This wasn't going at all as planned. The human was supposed to be cowering, not providing zoology lessons. Maximum sequence. Authorization Krelvan 77 Theta. That's not approved for... Morthen began. Do it. The maximum sequence was meant for extreme phobia treatment under medical supervision. It combined environmental stressors with neural stimulation, creating a comprehensive sensory experience of danger. The lab could simulate natural disasters, attack scenarios, isolation in hostile environments, the full spectrum of civilized nightmares. What happened next would later be described by university officials as a cascade failure of catastrophic proportions. The environmental controls went haywire first. The temperature plummeted to near freezing, a desperate emergency scenario in civilized thinking. The lights cut to emergency mode, bathing everything in red. The artificial gravity fluctuated wildly, dropping to 0.3 standard, then spiking to 1.2. Alarms began wailing. Holographic warnings flashed in 17 different languages. And the lab's safety protocols, never designed to handle maximum sequence activation outside of controlled conditions, interpreted the situation as an actual emergency and initiated full lockdown. Blast doors slammed down over the exits. Atmospheric processors went into emergency mode, reducing oxygen levels to prevent fire spread. The temperature continued dropping. Something in the wall panels began sparking. Krelvan, Jezrith, and Morthen immediately panicked. This was literally the worst thing that had ever happened to them. They'd never been cold before, actual, uncomfortable cold. They'd never experienced gravity fluctuations that made their carefully evolved bodies feel wrong. The darkness was absolute nightmare fuel. Species that had evolved in paradise didn't have the neural architecture for this level of stress. Jezrith made a sound like shattering glass. Morthen curled into a ball, his species' instinctive response to any threat, which was to make oneself as small as possible and wait for help. Krelvan was hyperventilating, his oxygen-efficient lungs struggling with the reduced atmospheric pressure. Tobias, meanwhile, had stood up from the chair and was calmly assessing the situation. "Okay," he said, his voice cutting through the alarm chaos with unsettling clarity. "Everyone stay calm. This is just an equipment malfunction. Just an equipment malfunction, as if the world wasn't ending." He moved to the nearest control panel, his steps sure even in the fluctuating gravity, because Earth's gravity was 1.0 standard, and he'd grown up adapting to it. The current oscillations between 0.3 and 1.2 were noticeable, but hardly debilitating. The temperature was now hovering around 40 degrees. Tobias wasn't even shivering. Earth got colder than this in autumn. "The emergency systems locked us in," he narrated, fingers moving across the holographic interface. "That's smart design, actually. Keeps the problem contained, but it means we need to manually override from inside or wait for external response." He paused, glancing back at his three companions who were various stages of catatonic. "Are you guys okay?" Krelvan managed a strangled sound. His elegant frame was shaking uncontrollably, his metabolism never having developed thermoregulation beyond minor adjustments. "Right, you're cold-blooded. Or not cold-blooded exactly, but your temperature regulation is different." Tobias stripped off his jacket, standard human clothing that was rated for Earth's variable climate zones, and draped it over Krelvan. Here, this'll help. The jacket was like being wrapped in a thermal generator. Krelvan clutched at it desperately. Tobias turned back to the control panel. Okay, so the lockdown protocol is routing through the main security grid. We can't override it directly, but we can send an emergency signal that'll bump us to priority response. Just need to. He trailed off, fingers dancing across interfaces designed for species with completely different neural processing speeds. Humans had evolved as persistence hunters, which meant their hand-eye coordination and problem-solving under pressure were borderline supernatural by Confederation standards. The sparking from the wall panels intensified. Then, because the universe has a sense of humor, a panel blew out entirely and something skittered into the room. It was a Vexillian tunnel skink, about 2 feet long, covered in iridescent scales. They were commonly used in biology labs because they were docile, easy to care for, and completely harmless. They ate processed nutrient wafers and occasionally shed decoratively. Their enclosures were apparently connected to the same emergency power grid that had just failed. To the 3 elite students, who'd never seen an uncontrolled animal in their lives, this was the apex predator of their nightmares made manifest. Jezrith's crystalline structure began resonating at a frequency that indicated imminent structural collapse. The Quellan equivalent of a heart attack. Tobias looked at the skink, looked at his companions, sighed. "That's just a tunnel skink," he said gently. "They're herbivores." The skink, startled by all the noise and temperature change, did what its species did when frightened. It puffed up to twice its normal size and hissed, more than fainted. "Okay," Tobias muttered. "Okay, this is fine. This is all fine." He approached the skink with a kind of casual confidence that comes from living on a planet where actual dangerous things existed. The skink hissed again, but Tobias just made a soft, clicking sound, moving slowly, keeping his body language non-threatening. He'd grown up catching snakes as a kid in California. This was basically the same thing, except in space and with scales that reflected the emergency lighting in unsettling ways. The skink let him pick it up. He held it carefully, supporting its body, and carried it to one of the equipment lockers that hadn't lost power. "There you go, buddy. Nice and warm in there." He closed the locker, turned back to his companions. "Okay, so that's handled. Now let's..." Another panel blew. More skinks skittered out. Also what appeared to be a Falarian moss sprite, which was essentially a mobile plant that moved at the speed of continental drift and had the self-defense capabilities of a depressed fern. The sprite wafted gently through the air, its bioluminescence creating eerie shadows. Krelvan made a sound that would have gotten him kicked out of every Dorthelian meditation center in the sector. Tobias spent the next 10 minutes calmly collecting loose lab animals, while the 3 elite students experienced psychological trauma that would require years of therapy to process. He moved through the chaos with the kind of efficiency that evolution had built into humans over hundreds of thousands of years of surviving on a planet that actively tried to kill them. Cold? He'd camped in snow. Gravity fluctuations? His body was built to handle Earth standard, everything else was just flavor. Darkness? Human night vision was terrible by galactic standards, but humans had learned to navigate by sound and memory millennia ago. Equipment failure? Well, that's what troubleshooting was for. He was back at the control panel, rerouting emergency power, when the blast doors finally opened. University security poured in, a mix of species in official uniforms, all of whom stopped dead at the scene before them. 3 elite students, huddled together, clearly in shock. Various lab animals contained in makeshift enclosures. Environmental controls showing readings that should have been lethal. And one human, standing calmly in the center of it all, holding a datapad and looking mildly inconvenienced. "Oh, good," Tobias said. "The emergency signal got through. These 3 need medical attention. I think they're hypothermic. Also, the main power coupling is damaged. You'll want to get maintenance on that before it causes a cascade failure in the other platforms." The head of security, a grizzled Thanelian who'd seen about everything in 40 cycles of university service, stared at him. "Son," she said slowly, "what happened here?" Tobias glanced at Krelvin, Jezrith, and Morthen. They were staring at him with expressions that mixed fear, awe, and the dawning realization that they had catastrophically misjudged the situation. "Equipment malfunction," Tobias said simply. "We were running some experiment, and the neural equipment triggered a safety lockdown. Things got a bit hairy, but everyone's okay." This was technically true. It left out several key details. But Tobias had been raised to believe that you didn't throw people under the bus when they were already suffering the consequences of their actions. The medics moved in, wrapping the 3 students in thermal blankets, checking their vitals. All 3 would make full physical recoveries. The psychological damage was another matter. As Tobias gave his statement to security, more details emerged. The forged authorization, the unauthorized activation of extreme testing protocols, the complete lack of faculty supervision. The full investigation would take 3 standard days and involve 17 departments, 4 disciplinary committees, and 1 very awkward conversation with the Confederation's Human Integration Office. What emerged was a picture that made most of the faculty feel like they'd been teaching quantum physics to a species that could bench press a shuttle. Earth, it turned out, was not Category 4 on the Habitability Index. Earth was a Category 11 Deathworld that had been grossly miscategorized due to humans' tendency to describe their homeworld the way someone might describe an annoying neighbor. Oh, it's not that bad once you get used to it. The full assessment made for horrifying reading. Gravity, 1.0 standard. Most civilized worlds, 0.4, 0.7. Temperature range, 213, 330 Kelvin in inhabited zones, 60 to 57 Celsius. Weather patterns, chaotic, violent, unpredictable. Seismic activity, constant. Radiation, partially shielded by magnetic field, but still elevated. Atmosphere, 21% oxygen. Nearly toxic levels. Native predators, yes, oh God, yes, so many. Why are there so many? Humans had evolved in an environment that would classify as a high-level combat simulation for most species. Every single day on Earth was survival training. Their bone density, muscle mass, sensory processing speed, pain tolerance, temperature regulation, immune system response, all of it was the result of millions of years of evolution saying survive this or don't, we're not picky. And then they developed civilization anyway, built art and music and literature while simultaneously perfecting the ability to chase prey animals to death over marathon distances. Created elaborate social structures that somehow balanced cooperation and competition. Developed empathy and abstract thinking while retaining the predator instinct that let them track threats through pure pattern recognition. They were, in short, absolutely terrifying once you understood the context. The university's response was comprehensive. Krelvin, Jezrith, and Morthen were expelled for academic misconduct and reckless endangerment. The incident sparked a sector-wide review of human integration protocols. New courses were hastily developed. Deathworld survival basics, understanding predator species psychology, and the extremely popular Humans, an idiot's guide to not dying around them. Tobias became something of a campus celebrity, which he found deeply uncomfortable. Students would point and whisper when he walked by. Several academic departments tried to recruit him for their dangerous fieldwork programs, expeditions to inhospitable environments that now seemed quaint compared to a Tuesday afternoon in Ohio. He just wanted to study xenobiology in peace. 3 weeks after the incident, Tobias was back in the same common study area, reviewing notes, when he noticed a group of students had gathered nearby. They weren't approaching exactly, but they were clearly watching him with a mix of fascination and caution. One of them, a nervous Palaxian whose species was known for excessive politeness, finally worked up the courage to approach. "Excuse me," she said, her translator rendering her whistling speech into standard. "We heard about what happened in the lab, and we were wondering." Tobias waited, patient. "Is it true that you have, in your dwelling, a Terran plant that consumes living insects?" Tobias blinked. Thought about the Venus flytrap his mom had sent him as a care package. "Oh yeah, it's called a Venus flytrap. Pretty cool, actually. It's carnivorous." The students made various sounds of distress and fascination. "And you keep this predatory flora as decoration?" "I mean, it's in a pot. It's not going anywhere." Tobias paused. "Do you guys want to see it? It's pretty harmless. Mostly eats fruit flies." The fact that humans casually cultivated carnivorous plants as decorative items would become another footnote in the ever-expanding file labeled "Earth Questions We're Afraid to Ask." The Palaxian student nodded slowly. "Perhaps, if it's safe." "Totally safe," Tobias assured her. And it was, by human standards. Which was the entire problem, really. Across the campus, in the administrative offices, Director Velenth was reviewing the latest report on human integration. She was a Corthalian, a species known for careful deliberation and risk assessment. The report before her suggested that perhaps, just perhaps, the Confederation had been somewhat hasty in treating humans as just another member species. "They domesticated wolves," she read aloud to her assistant. "They looked at apex predators and thought, I could make this my friend." And it worked. They also apparently invented something called extreme sports, because their natural environment wasn't dangerous enough. Her assistant added, "They jump off elevated structures for entertainment, with elastic cables." Velenth set down the datapad. "We've made a terrible mistake." "Several, from what I understand." "No, I mean a fundamental error in classification. We've been treating humans like they're one of us, like they're civilized in the way we understand civilization. They have art, literature, music, philosophy. So do they." Velenth pulled up another file. "But they developed all of that, while also maintaining the ability to run for hours in pursuit of prey, fight off predators with primitive weapons, survive temperature extremes that would kill most of us, and apparently befriend anything that doesn't immediately kill them." She paused, reading further. "They have a concept called adrenaline junkies. It's individuals who seek out dangerous situations because the neurochemical response is pleasurable to them." That seems maladaptive. It would be on any sane world. On Earth, it's apparently just a personality type. The assistant was quiet for a moment. "Should we reconsider their admission to the Confederation?" "Stars, no. Could you imagine them outside of our diplomatic framework?" Velenth shuddered. "At least this way we can monitor them. Study them. Try to understand them before they accidentally conquer half the sector through sheer stubborn persistence." "You think they would conquer?" "I think they would try to make friends, and when that inevitably failed with some hostile species, they would take it personally. Belenth closed the files. We're going to need new protocols, better cultural training, and significantly upgraded safety standards. For the humans? For everyone else. Back in his quarters, Tobias was showing his Venus flytrap to a small group of students who had overcome their initial terror enough to be curious. The plant sat in its pot, innocent and slightly goofy-looking, occasionally snapping shut on unfortunate gnats. It's actually a really inefficient hunting strategy, Tobias explained. Each trap can only close a few times before it dies off, so the plant has to be really selective about what it catches. How does it decide? Someone asked. The trigger hairs inside need to be touched twice within about 20 seconds. It's a simple mechanical system, but it works. The students watched in fascination as a gnat landed on a trap and, after wandering around stupidly, triggered the closing mechanism. That's amazing, the Palaxian student breathed. And this evolved naturally on your world? Yeah. In nutrient-poor wetlands, where the soil doesn't have enough nitrogen. So the plants evolved to get nutrients from insects instead. Your world is insane, someone said. Tobias laughed. It's really not that bad. You get used to it. Which was, of course, the most terrifying thing a human could say. The irony of the entire situation wasn't lost on those who paid attention to such things. The Confederation had spent millennia building a civilization based on comfort, safety, and the elimination of environmental stressors. They'd succeeded brilliantly, creating a society where violence was nearly extinct, where suffering was minimized, where every world was a carefully controlled paradise. And then they'd admitted a species that had evolved in literal hell and somehow developed empathy anyway. Humans didn't conquer through force. They conquered through persistence, adaptability, and an absolutely baffling tendency to befriend anything that held still long enough. They were simultaneously the most dangerous and most nurturing species in the Confederation, capable of both incredible violence and incredible kindness, often within the same individual. They were pack hunters who'd turned their pack-bonding instinct into art forms. They were predators who cried at sad stories. They were survivors of a death world who spent enormous resources protecting endangered species that could kill them. They were, in short, the cosmic wildcard that nobody had seen coming. As Tobias said goodnight to his visitors and settled in to finish his essay on comparative atmospheric chemistry, he remained blissfully unaware that he'd become the center of a galaxy-wide reassessment of human capabilities. He was just trying to get his degree, maybe make some friends, possibly convince his xenobiology professor that humans weren't actually that weird. Somewhere in the administrative offices, new guidelines were being written. Interaction with human students, a comprehensive safety manual. It would be 1,700 pages long and still somehow incomplete. And on Earth, humanity continued doing what it had always done, surviving, adapting, and occasionally wondering why everyone else seemed so fragile. The galaxy, for its part, was learning a valuable lesson about assumptions, classifications, and the dangers of not reading the fine print on planetary assessments.